They invited her to the party to be their joke. They thought she would tremble, bow her head, and disappear in silence, just as she had done for the past 24 years of her life. But that night, before hundreds of Chicago's most powerful men, the man feared by the underworld knelt before the waitress, and no one in the room dared to breathe a word. This is the story of a woman invited as a joke and leaving as a legend. Like, comment your city so I know how far this story has come. And stay tuned because what happens at the end will leave you speechless. Elara Quinn woke up that morning the same way she woke up every morning, to the sound of pipes groaning in the walls and a ceiling that needed fixing 6 months ago and still hadn't been fixed. She lay there for a moment, staring at the water stain above her bed. It had spread since last winter, creeping outward in a ring the color of weak tea, and sometimes when the light was bad, she thought it looked like a map of nowhere. She'd stopped caring about it somewhere around the same time she'd stopped caring about a lot of things. Not because she was broken, but because caring cost energy, and energy was something she rationed now, like a resource she couldn't afford to waste. The alarm on her phone had already gone off twice. She silenced it both times without thinking. Chicago in November did not forgive you for sleeping in. The cold came through the single-pane windows with a kind of casual violence, the kind that didn't announce itself, just settled into your bones while you weren't paying attention. She pulled the blanket tighter and closed her eyes for 11 more seconds. She counted them. 11 was the number she allowed herself. Then she got up. The bathroom mirror in the apartment on West Willow Street was cracked in the lower left corner, a hairline fracture she'd taped over with a strip of electrical tape that had since gone gray. She brushed her teeth, washed her face with water that took 2 minutes to get warm, and looked at herself the way a person looks at their car before a long drive, checking for damage, not looking for beauty. She was not ugly. She'd been told she was not ugly. Dark hair she kept pulled back because loose hair in a diner was a liability, eyes that were dark too, a jaw that set hard when she was thinking. She had a scar on her left temple, thin and pale, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. She knew to look for it. She worked a double at Rosie's Diner on Michigan Avenue most days, which meant leaving by 6:15 and not getting home until 11 if she was lucky, midnight if she wasn't. Today was Tuesday, which meant the morning rush would be bad because Tuesday mornings were always bad, which meant she needed to eat something before she left because there was no time once she got there. She ate standing at the kitchen counter. Instant oatmeal, half a banana, black coffee she made in the small machine her mother had left behind. The coffee was the one thing in the apartment she kept clean without thinking about it. Everything else accumulated. Dishes, mail, the exhaustion that lived in her shoulders, but the coffee machine she wiped down every day. Her mother had been dead for 14 months. Elara did not think about this in the mornings. In the mornings, she did not think about anything that required more than 15% of her brain. She had learned to partition herself this way years ago, when the hospital bills started stacking up and thinking too much about any one thing would have made it impossible to do all the others. She finished the oatmeal, rinsed the bowl, put on her coat. Outside, the wind off the lake came at her sideways. Rosie's was not a bad place to work if you understood what it was. It was not a place that pretended to be something else. The booths were vinyl, cracked in the seats, and the menus were laminated and sticky along the edges, and the cook, whose name was actually Rosie, had a voice like gravel in a blender and no patience for anything she considered theatrical. Elara had worked there for 3 years. She was good at it, not in the way that gets noticed, but in the way that makes a place function. She remembered orders without writing them down. She kept her tables clean. She showed up. The morning rush came and went. By 10 o'clock, the place had emptied out enough that she could breathe, and she was refilling the salt shakers at table 4 when Devin Marsh came in through the front door. Devin was a line cook at a restaurant 2 blocks away, and he came into Rosie's sometimes on his days off because Rosie made better eggs than his own restaurant, a fact that delighted Rosie and annoyed him in equal measure. Elara liked Devin because he didn't require anything from her beyond the transaction. He sat down, ordered coffee and eggs, and pulled out his phone. "You look terrible," he said when she brought the coffee. "Thanks, Devin." "Like, worse than usual. You sleeping?" "Enough." "That's not the same as yes." She didn't answer. She set the coffee down, wrote his order on her pad even though she didn't need to, and went back behind the counter. Through the pass-through window, she could see Rosie cracking eggs with a precision that looked almost violent, the shells splitting clean every time. The envelope was on the counter when she turned around. She hadn't seen anyone leave it. It was cream-colored, thick stock, the kind of paper that communicated money before you even touched it. Her name was written across the front in a script so precise it looked like it had been done by a machine. Not printed, actually written by a hand that had been trained to write that way. She picked it up. She thought about not opening it. She opened it. Inside was a single card, creamed to match the envelope, embossed at the top with a crest she didn't recognize. 2 interlocked A's beneath a crown, rendered in gold ink that caught the fluorescent light. Below the crest, in the same precise hand, Miss Ilara Quinn is cordially invited to attend the annual Ashcroft Foundation Charity Gala, Friday, November 14th at 7 o'clock in the evening. Ashcroft Estate, Lakeshore Drive. Black tie. Your attendance would be a personal honor. She read it twice. She looked up as if whoever had left it might still be there. The diner was empty except for Devin scrolling his phone and an old man by the window she didn't know, nursing a cup of tea. Devin. He looked up. Did you see who left this? He looked at the envelope, shrugged. Didn't notice. What is it? She handed it across. He took it, read it, raised his eyebrows. The Ashcroft Gala. He said it the way you say the name of a place you've only ever read about. That's the big one, Lakeshore Drive. You know who the Ashcrofts are? I know the name. Old money. Not like new money old, I mean like built half of Chicago old. Vivian Ashcroft goes to that gala every year. It's in the society pages. He handed the card back. Why are they inviting you? I don't know. The question sat there between them, and neither of them had an answer for it. And the thing about questions you can't answer is that they have a weight to them, a particular kind of gravity that pulls at you even when you're trying not to let them. She put the card back in the envelope. She put the envelope in her apron pocket. She went back to work. That evening, on her break, she searched the name. The Ashcroft Foundation Gala was exactly what it sounded like. An annual charity event hosted by the Ashcroft family, one of the oldest and wealthiest dynasties in Chicago. The guest list every year read like a catalog of the city's most powerful people. Politicians, executives, the kind of names that appeared on the sides of buildings. The event raised money for children's hospitals and arts programs, or at least that was the public version of what it did. The actual function of an event like that, Ilara understood without needing to be told, was something else entirely. It was a place where people went to see and be seen, to confirm their positions in a hierarchy that had nothing to do with merit and everything to do with inheritance. Vivian Ashcroft was 26. She appeared in roughly half the photos Ilara found, usually in the center of the frame, usually in something that cost more than Ilara's rent. She was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, maintained, polished, constructed. Her smile in every photograph was the same smile, which told Ilara something about her without being able to say exactly what. She had no reason to invite Ilara Quinn. She had no reason to know Ilara Quinn existed. That was the part that didn't resolve no matter how long she turned it over. Ilara was 24 years old. She waited tables at a diner in Lincoln Park. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment with cracked windows and a water-stained ceiling. She was not connected to anyone in Vivian Ashcroft's world. She had never been to a black tie event in her life. She did not own anything she could reasonably describe as black tie. She should have ignored it. She thought about ignoring it the rest of that shift, and the whole walk home, and lying in bed that night staring at the water stain above her. She didn't ignore it. And bam. She borrowed the dress from a woman named Carmen, who worked the evening shift at Rosie's and had a sister who'd gotten married 2 years ago and left a bridesmaid's dress behind in Carmen's closet, a floor-length thing in deep green that was close enough to black in the wrong light. Carmen was 2 sizes larger than Ilara, but the dress had structure to it, and with a safety pin at the back of the waist, it mostly worked. "You look good," Carmen said, adjusting the strap at Ilara's shoulder. "I look like I borrowed someone's dress." Everyone at those things borrows something. Carmen stepped back, tilted her head. "You look good, I'm telling you. Why are you even going?" "I don't know." "That's a bad reason to go somewhere." "I know." Carmen looked at her for a moment with an expression that Ilara couldn't fully read, something between concern and something else. Something that said, "I've seen you make decisions like this before, and I've never been able to stop you." Just be careful, okay? Those people, they're not like, I know what they're like. Do you? Alara didn't answer. She picked up the small clutch she dug out of the back of her closet, the one she hadn't used since her mother's last good birthday, and she walked out the door. The Ashcroft estate on Lakeshore Drive was not a house. Calling it a house would be like calling a cathedral a room. It occupied a full city block, set back from the street behind an iron gate that stood open tonight, flanked by valets in dark coats who moved with the practiced invisibility of people paid to witness without observing. The driveway alone was longer than the entire length of Alara's apartment building. Lights blazed from every window. A string quartet played somewhere inside that she could hear faintly from the street, the sound floating out across the cold air like something from a different century. She got out of the cab, an Uber she'd spent 20 minutes debating because of the cost, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Her breath came out white in the cold. She walked in. The ballroom was something a person like Alara was not supposed to see, and definitely not supposed to walk into wearing a borrowed dress with a safety pin holding the back together. The ceiling was 30 feet up, coffered and gilded, hung with chandeliers that threw light and patterns across the floor. The floors were marble, white, and gray, and the sound of 100 conversations bounced off them and off the walls until the room hummed with it, a low, continuous vibration that you felt in your chest before you heard it with your ears. She took a glass of champagne from a passing tray because her hands needed something to do. She recognized no one. She moved along the perimeter of the room the way she moved through Rosie's during a rush, efficiently, without hesitation, keeping her body in the spaces where she was least likely to become an obstacle. She had spent enough years being invisible that she knew how to inhabit it as a strategy. Keep moving. Don't make eye contact that invites conversation. Stay near the walls. She had been there perhaps 12 minutes when she understood why she'd been invited. She heard the laughter before she saw its source. A particular kind of laughter, bright and deliberate and aimed, the kind that requires an audience and a target. She turned toward it and saw 3 women near the center of the room, all of them in dresses that cost more than Alara made in a month. And in the middle of them was Vivian Ashcroft, who was more beautiful in person than in photographs and whose eyes, when they found Alara across the room, lit up with something that had nothing to do with welcome. One of the women, blonde, sharp-shouldered, holding her champagne glass like it was evidence, leaned toward the woman beside her and said something. The woman beside her glanced at Alara, smiled, looked away. Alara kept her face still. She had spent a lot of her life keeping her face still, but she understood now. The invitation wasn't an honor. The invitation was a setup. She was here because she was something that made this room feel better about itself. A contrast, a punchline, a demonstration of the distance between what these people were and what people like her were. The borrowed dress, the Uber, the girl who waited their tables on a different day of the week. She thought about leaving. She was still thinking about it when Vivian Ashcroft moved through the crowd toward her with the confident ease of someone walking through rooms they own, and stopped 3 feet away and smiled. "Alara Quinn," she said. Not a question. "Yes. I'm so glad you came." She said it the way people say things they do not mean in front of crowds. "I've been telling my friends about you." "I don't know why you would." Vivian tilted her head slightly. "You worked at my friend Celia's engagement party 3 weeks ago. Do you remember?" She did. A catering job, one of several she took when the diner wasn't enough. Celia Hartman's engagement party at a penthouse in the Gold Coast. She'd spent 4 hours circulating with trays of miniature things she couldn't name. "I remember," Alara said. "You spilled wine on the tablecloth during the toast. I was bumped from behind." "Of course." Vivian's smile didn't change. "Well, I wanted to give you a chance to experience the other side of things. See how the event is supposed to feel when you're a guest." She paused. "It's a charity event, after all. Generosity is the whole point." The words landed exactly where they were meant to land. Alara said nothing. She held her champagne glass and kept her face still and looked at Vivian Ashcroft directly, which was the one thing she'd learned over 24 years of being underestimated. Don't look away. Whatever they want to see in your face, don't give it to them. Vivian held her gaze for a moment, then turned back toward her group. "Enjoy the evening," she said over her shoulder. Alara stood there. She did not leave. Month. The next 40 minutes were a slow accumulation of small humiliations. A waiter who mistook her for catering staff and asked her to clear a table. A man in his 50s who asked her which agency she was from, assuming she was hired. Two women near the bar who stopped their conversation when she got close, resumed it when she moved away. These were not dramatic injuries. They were the kind that don't bleed and don't show, the kind you absorb in your skin over a lifetime until they become indistinguishable from the texture of existing. She absorbed them. She stood near one of the tall windows that looked out over the lake, the water black and moving below, and she drank champagne she couldn't taste, and she waited for whatever was going to happen next, because something was going to happen next. She had known that from the moment she walked in. The question was only what shape it would take. She did not have to wait long. The announcement came from across the room, not shouted, but projected in Vivian's clear, carrying voice, the voice of someone who'd been trained from childhood to fill rooms without appearing to try. "Would someone please get security? I believe something has gone missing." The room shifted, conversations paused, heads turned. Vivian stood near the center of the ballroom, her hand at her throat, her expression arranged into something that performed distress without quite achieving it. Beside her, a woman with white hair, her mother, Alara thought, recognizing her from photographs, placed a hand on Vivian's arm. "My necklace," Vivian said. Her eyes moved across the room, tracking, and then stopped. "The Ashcroft diamond. I had it on an hour ago." Two security guards in dark suits appeared from somewhere at the edges of the room, and then Vivian looked directly at Alara. "I noticed it missing," she said, still in that carrying voice. "When I was speaking with our guest, the waitress." She let the word land. "From the diner on Michigan Avenue." The room was not fully quiet yet, but it was getting there. Alara felt the attention before she saw it. That particular physical sensation of many eyes orienting in your direction, a pressure that has no source you can point to. She didn't move. "I think we should check her bag," someone said. She couldn't see who. The security guards were moving toward her. Her hands were cold. The champagne glass was still in her right hand, her small clutch in her left. She thought about her mother, for no reason she could have explained. She thought about the morning, the water stain on the ceiling, the 11 seconds she'd given herself before getting up. "Ma'am." The guard on the left was close enough now that she could see the earpiece, the slight thickening at the bridge of his nose from an old break. "We're going to need to ask you to come with us." "I didn't take anything," she said. "That's fine, ma'am. We just need to verify—" "I didn't take anything." "Alara." Vivian's voice again, from somewhere behind the crowd that had begun to form. "No one is accusing you of anything, but you understand how this looks." She understood exactly how this looked. That was the point. She let them take her to the center of the room because fighting it would have looked worse than compliance. And because some part of her, the part that had absorbed humiliation for 24 years, recognized that the only move available was to stand still and let it happen and not give them the reaction they were waiting for. The search was not gentle. The clutch was opened, its contents, her phone, her keys, a folded $20 bill, laid out on a table someone had cleared. Her coat was taken from a nearby rack where she'd left it. The pockets were turned out. The guards moved around her while the guests watched, and she stood in the center of the Ashcroft ballroom in Carmen's borrowed green dress with the safety pin at the back of the waist. And she did not cry, and she did not speak, and she kept her face as still as she knew how to keep it. The necklace was not found on her person. Vivian frowned, pressed her lips together, and said in a voice just loud enough for the nearest guest to hear, "Perhaps she left it somewhere. After all, she doesn't know how to handle things like this." The laughter was not loud. It was the polite, contained kind, the kind that was almost worse because it was so controlled, so practiced, so clearly something these people had done before and would do again. Alara looked at the floor. She was not going to cry. She was absolutely not going to. The doors at the far end of the ballroom opened, not the side doors that guests had been using all evening. The main doors, the ones that were twice the height of a person and had been closed all night. They opened, and the music stopped. Not gradually, not fading. Stopped, as if cut by a blade, the quartet ceasing mid-phrase in a way that must have been involuntary because no musician chooses to end like that. And in the silence that followed, which was the most complete silence Alara had heard in a room full of people since her mother's last hours, she heard footsteps. One set, unhurried. The crowd parted the way crowds do when they are responding to something instinctive, something below the level of thought. Not because they were asked to, because they needed to. And Alara looked up. The man who walked through the center of the Ashcroft ballroom was not the largest person in the room or the best dressed. He wore a black suit without decoration, no tie, collar open at the throat, and he moved through the parted crowd with the particular quality of someone who understood that space would be made available and had long since stopped being surprised by it. His face was not handsome in any conventional sense. It was a face that had been through things, a jaw that had taken hits and was built for it, eyes that were dark and entirely still. She had never seen him before, but she knew, from the way every person in the room had gone rigid, from the way Vivian Ashcroft's carefully arranged expression had cracked for just a moment before she reassembled it, from the way even the security guards had taken a half step back without appearing to mean to. She knew this was not someone who attended events. This was someone events did not expect. He stopped walking. In the center of the room, 5 feet from where Alara stood, still half searched, still the object of 100 carefully averted eyes. He looked at her, not at the room, not at Vivian, not at the guards or the guests or the Ashcroft estate that surrounded them, at her. And something crossed his face that she could not read. Not recognition, not exactly, but something that moved through his expression and left it changed, the way weather moves through a sky. He looked at her for what felt like a very long time. Then he looked at Vivian Ashcroft. "What," he said in a voice that was quiet and did not need to be anything else, "is happening here?" It was not a question. Vivian Ashcroft was not accustomed to being asked questions by people she hadn't invited. She recovered fast. That much Alara could see, watching it happen in real time. The crack in her expression sealing over the way ice reforms after you put pressure on it. The smile came back. Not the same smile as before. A different version of it, something with more architecture to it, built to withstand scrutiny. "Mr. Voss," she said. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Alara watched the ripple move outward through the nearest guests, a slight stiffening, a collective intake that wasn't quite a breath. "What a surprise. We didn't know you'd be attending." "I don't announce myself," Damien Voss said. He hadn't looked away from Vivian yet. "You didn't answer my question." "We had a small incident." Vivian's hand moved to her throat in a gesture Alara now recognized as performance. "A piece of jewelry went missing. We were simply taking precautions." "With her?" "She was in the area when—" "With her specifically." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one that had come before. This one had direction to it, like pressure building behind a door. Vivian's composure held. She was good at this, Alara thought. Whatever else she was good at this. "It's a private matter, Mr. Voss. I'm sure you understand." "I don't," he said. "Explain it to me." Alara stood very still. She was aware of herself in a way she rarely was. The safety pin at the back of her waist, the slight roughness of Carmen's dress against her arms, the champagne glass she was still holding even though it had been empty for 10 minutes. Her hands were steady. She made them stay that way. Damien Voss turned his head and looked at her for the second time. "Are you all right?" he asked. The question was so direct, so stripped of the social scaffolding she'd been navigating all evening, that it took her a moment to process it. Around them, 100 people were pretending not to watch. "I'm fine," she said. "You don't look fine." "I'm fine." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. An acknowledgement. "Put the glass down," he said, not unkindly. "You've been holding it like a shield for the last 5 minutes." She looked down at her hand. She set the glass on the nearest table. Boom. What happened in the next 4 minutes would be reported differently by everyone who witnessed it, because what people remember about moments like that is always filtered through what they needed the moment to mean. The people who feared Damien Voss remembered his stillness. The people who envied Vivian Ashcroft remembered her composure. The people who had watched Alara be searched and mocked and standing in the center of the room in a borrowed dress, and there were a few of them who had the decency to feel something about that, remembered the way she didn't look down. What actually happened was simpler and more brutal than any of the versions people would tell later. Damien Voss asked for the head of security by name. The man, broad, professional, clearly accustomed to being the largest presence in any room, came forward with the particular body language of someone who had spent the evening doing what he was told and was now uncertain whose instructions to follow. "Show me the footage," Damien said. "Sir, this is a private estate and—" "Show me the footage." The security chief looked at Vivian. Vivian's jaw tightened by a fraction. "This isn't your concern, Mr. Voss. You invited me to your city's most prominent social event and accused someone in front of 400 witnesses of theft with no evidence." He paused. "That makes it my concern." "We didn't invite—" Vivian stopped, recalibrated. "The Foundation sends invitations broadly. I don't come to things I'm not interested in." He looked at the security chief again. "The footage." Alara watched this exchange with the careful attention of someone who has learned that understanding a room is a survival skill. What she understood in those 4 minutes was layered and arrived in pieces. Damien Voss was not here by accident. That much was plain. But the why of it, the particular shape of his interest, was something she couldn't yet read. She watched him the way she watched people at the diner sometimes, when she had a moment and they didn't know she was watching, for the thing underneath the thing they were showing. What she saw was a man who was very tired and very controlled about it. The footage review happened in a side room off the ballroom, a smaller space lined with dark wood paneling, a single desk, 4 chairs. Vivian did not want to do it, and it happened anyway. Alara was not asked to come, but she followed, and no one stopped her, and she stood near the wall while the security chief pulled up the feed on a tablet and set it on the desk. The camera covered the main hall entrance and part of the ballroom perimeter. The timestamp was accurate to the minute. Damien sat. He watched without expression. The footage showed Vivian near the coat check, 32 minutes into the evening, her hand at her neck, the necklace visible. Then, 11 minutes later, the same spot. The necklace not visible. The window of its disappearance was 11 minutes, and in those 11 minutes, Alara could be seen, clearly, continuously, on the far side of the room. Damien stopped the footage. He looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at the wall behind his left shoulder. Camera angles can be misleading. She was 50 feet away when the necklace went missing. That's one interpretation. It's the interpretation the footage supports. He put the tablet down on the desk, very carefully, the way a person puts something down when they are making a choice about how they're going to handle the next 30 seconds. "Where is it?" "I don't know what you mean." "Vivian." Her name in his mouth had weight. "Where is the necklace?" She held his gaze for 4 seconds. Alara counted. 4 seconds of Vivian Ashcroft meeting the eyes of Damien Voss without blinking, which was an act of will that Alara could recognize and even, reluctantly, respect. Then Vivian looked away. "This is my home," she said quietly. "You don't come into my home and—" "I'm not in your home. I'm in a room where you just publicly destroyed someone's evening for sport." He stood. "Fix it." "I don't take orders from—" "Fix it." The silence after that was very small and very complete. "What?" Vivian fixed it in the way that people like Vivian fix things, which was imperfectly and with attribution. She returned to the ballroom and announced, in a voice carefully modulated to communicate relief rather than retraction, that the necklace had been located. A mistake had been made. She was so sorry for the confusion. She did not say Alara's name. She did not look in Alara's direction. The announcement was 2 sentences, and then she was talking about something else, and the room absorbed it and moved on, the way rooms at events like this were designed to do. Alara stood near the entrance to the side room and watched this happen. She should leave now. The rational, self-preserving thing to do was to get her coat, walk to the door, call the Uber, go home to the apartment with the water-stained ceiling and the cracked mirror and the coffee machine that was the one clean thing, and never think about this evening again. She knew that. She also knew that she was not going to do it, for reasons she couldn't fully articulate even to herself. Some part of her. The part that had counted 11 seconds every morning for 14 months instead of 12 or 10. The part that had calculated exactly how much fight she had left and portioned it out. That part was not ready to leave. Damien Voss appeared beside her. She hadn't heard him approach, which said something about how quiet he could move when he chose to. "You should eat something," he said. "I'm not hungry." "You've been working since 6 this morning." She turned her head to look at him. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer that question. He said instead, "There's a terrace on the north side of the building, less crowded." "I don't—" She stopped. "Why are you doing this?" He was quiet for a moment. In the ballroom behind them, the string quartet had started playing again, something Alara didn't recognize, the kind of music designed to mean nothing specific so that it could mean anything. "Eating or talking?" he asked. "Either. Both." He looked at the room, at the people in it. His eyes moved through the crowd with the systematic patience of someone cataloging exits. "Not here," he said. "I didn't come here to go somewhere else with a stranger." "No," he agreed. "You came here because someone wanted you to." The directness of it landed somewhere in her chest. "Yeah," she said after a beat. "I know." "Do you know why?" She looked at Vivian across the room, laughing now with 2 women near the bar, the performance of ease fully restored. "To make them feel better about themselves," she said. "That's what I was. Context. Like a before picture." Damien said nothing for a moment. Then, "Come to the terrace. 5 minutes. If you want to leave after that, I'll have a car waiting." She should say no. 5 minutes, she said. Tam. The terrace was cold and empty and looked out over the lake, which was black and wide and indifferent, in the way that very large bodies of water are indifferent. Not hostile, just vast. And vastness had a way of making the particular concerns of a Chicago ballroom feel like weather that would pass. There were 2 outdoor chairs she didn't sit in, and neither did he. They stood at the railing. "You don't remember me," Damien said. It wasn't a question, but she treated it like one. "Should I?" He was quiet for a moment. The lake moved below them, dark and restless. 7 years ago, he said. Maybe 7.5. You were living in Pilsen. She went still. Pilsen. The neighborhood where she'd grown up, where she'd lived with her mother through the years when the illness was still manageable and hadn't yet become the thing it became. The apartment above the dry cleaner, the alley behind it that flooded every spring. "I don't know you," she said. "You knew me as Eddie." The name hit her somewhere behind her sternum. She breathed through it. Eddie. A man in the alley behind the dry cleaner, 3 in the morning in early October. She'd been 17 and coming back from a late shift at the grocery store 2 blocks away. A man on the ground, badly hurt. The kind of hurt that had a cause she understood even then wasn't the kind you called a hospital for. She'd gone back upstairs and gotten the first aid kit her mother kept under the bathroom sink, and she'd come back and she'd cleaned the wounds, and she hadn't asked questions because questions would have made her complicit in the answers. She'd never seen him again after that night. She turned to look at Damien Voss. The jaw was the same. She hadn't known that until now because she hadn't been looking for it, but the jaw was the same, set hard, built for impact. The eyes, the way he held himself, even hurt and on the ground, like he was deciding whether to let the situation have him or take it back by force. "That was you," she said. "Yes," she breathed out slowly. "You looked different." "I was 23, and bleeding." "I remember the bleeding." She turned back to the lake. Her hands were on the railing and the metal was cold through her palms. "You didn't tell me your name." "No." "Why are you telling me now?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. The cold moved around them. The lake sent up a smell of deep water and distance, and somewhere inside the building the music continued its careful meaninglessness. "Because what she did to you in there," he said finally, "I know where it ends if no one stops it. I don't need someone to stop it for me. I know that." He said it without any quality of challenge, simply as acknowledgement. "That's not what I'm offering." She looked at him sideways. "What are you offering?" He didn't answer immediately. A muscle moved in his jaw. Not tension exactly, something more like precision, like he was choosing words with the care of someone who understood that words committed you to things. Information, he said, and a choice about what you do with it. Information about what? About why Vivian Ashcroft wanted you in that room tonight specifically. The cold off the lake sharpened. She felt it in her teeth. You know why. I have a theory. Tell me. Not yet. He turned from the railing. You should know something first. Walking back into that room, what I'm going to do in that room, it puts you in a different position than you're in right now. Right now you're a woman who was humiliated at a party. If you stay, you're something else. What am I? Involved. She held that word, turned it over. Involved. She thought about the diner, the morning shifts, the cracked mirror, the 14 months since her mother and the weight of them. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just heavy in the way that accumulating time is heavy when you've been carrying it alone. I was already involved, she said, the minute they put my name on that envelope. Something crossed his face again, that movement she couldn't fully name. Yeah, he said. You were. They went back inside together, and that alone changed the geometry of the room. Alara felt it the moment they crossed the threshold. The shift in attention, the recalibration. She watched heads turn, watched conversations pause at the edges of her peripheral vision, watched Vivian Ashcroft across the room register their entrance and go very still for a fraction of a second before resuming whatever she had been doing. Damien moved through the room toward the center, and she moved with him, not beside him exactly, not behind, but in proximity. And proximity to Damien Voss in this room meant something she hadn't agreed to and also hadn't refused. Near the main bar, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a face Alara recognized from a newspaper photo, Alderman, one of the old ones, in office since before she was born, intercepted them. Damien. The warmth in his voice was too warm, the kind of warmth that indicates debt. Didn't know you were coming this evening. I didn't plan to, Damien said. He didn't stop walking. Always good to see you. The alderman fell into step beside them for a moment. There's someone I'd like you to meet, actually, a contact who might be useful for the... Later, Damien said. The alderman peeled off. Alara said under her breath, Does everyone owe you something? Most people in this room, yes. That's not a comfortable thing to say. No, he agreed. It isn't. Vivian was waiting for them near the center of the room, not because she'd come to them, she'd made no movement, but because the center of the room was where she lived, the fixed point around which her particular version of the evening rotated, and they had moved to her. Up close, Vivian's composure was extraordinary. Alara watched it and felt something that was not quite admiration and not quite anything else. A recognition, maybe, of effort. Whatever Vivian was doing to maintain that surface, it was taking something. I thought you might be leaving, Vivian said. She was looking at Alara. Not yet, Alara said. Vivian's eyes moved to Damien. I hope you know what you're doing, she said. And the thing was, the words were addressed to him, but the warning was for Alara. You're investigators, Damien said. The ones who put the necklace in her coat. I don't know what you're... The coat was on the rack for 40 minutes before anyone searched it. The necklace wasn't in the footage until it was. He said it evenly, conversationally, the way you discuss the weather. Did you think I wouldn't check the timeline? Vivian's jaw was doing something now, holding itself together. You have no proof of... I have 3 people in this building right now who work for me. He looked around the room. One of them was standing 6 feet from you at 9:47. She saw the necklace go into the coat. She documented it. The color left Vivian Ashcroft's face. Not all of it. She was too controlled for that. But enough. This is my home, she said. And this time the words were not backed by anything, and they both knew it. And the 3 of them stood in the center of the Ashcroft Estate ballroom while 400 people pretended to be somewhere else. I know, Damien said. I want you to understand what that means now. And then his phone buzzed. He looked at it. Something changed in his face. Not much, a fractional adjustment, the kind you only catch if you're already watching. and he looked up at Alara with an expression she would spend days trying to decipher. "There's something you need to see," he said quietly. "About your mother." The room dropped away. "My mother is dead," Alara said. "I know," Damien said. "That's why you need to see it." The word mother had a specific weight when it came from a stranger's mouth, not the word itself. Alara had heard it thousands of times, from customers at the diner, from people on the street, from the nurses in the palliative ward who had used it with professional tenderness that she'd appreciated and also found unbearable in equal measure. It was the way Damien said it, not with tenderness, with precision. The way you say a word when you know the information attached to it is going to change the shape of something. "What about her?" Alara said. "Not here." "You don't get to say something like that and then tell me not here." He looked at her for a moment. Around them, the ballroom continued its performance of itself. The music, the champagne, the 100 conversations that had resumed their careful trajectories after the disruption of the last hour. Vivian had moved away. Alara hadn't tracked where. "There's a study on the second floor," Damien said. 15 minutes. "Now." "Alara." "Now," she said again, and something in her voice must have communicated that this was not a negotiation, because he studied her face for 3 seconds and then gave a single nod. The study was dark wood and floor-to-ceiling shelves and a desk that had probably cost more than Alara's car. Damien closed the door behind them. One of his people, a woman in her 30s, dark hair pulled back, the kind of face that didn't offer information, was already inside. She had a laptop open on the desk. Alara stood in the center of the room and crossed her arms. "Talk." Damien didn't sit. He stood near the desk, hands in his pockets, and looked at her with an expression that was careful in a way that made her more afraid than she'd been in the ballroom. Careful expressions meant the information required preparation. "Your mother's medical care," he said. "The last 2 years of it. What about it? Who was paying for it?" "I was." She said it without hesitation because it was the truth, or it had been the truth as she understood it. The second jobs, the catering gigs, the double shifts, the credit she'd taken on and was still paying down 14 months later. "Me? I was." "Partially," he said. The words sat in the air between them. "What?" The woman with the laptop turned the screen toward her. Alara looked at it. Medical billing records, hospital payment histories, the kind of documentation she recognized because she had spent 2 years drowning in exactly this paperwork. But these records showed something she had never seen, a secondary payment source routed through a foundation she didn't recognize, covering roughly 40% of her mother's total treatment costs in the final 19 months. She stared at the screen. "That's not... I didn't set that up." "No," Damien said. "You didn't." "Then who?" "The Ashcroft Foundation." She heard the words. She processed them. She looked at the screen again, at the name of the foundation that appeared in the payment records. And the name was there, clear, a corporate entity she now recognized from the embossed card that had brought her to this room in a borrowed dress tonight. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "It does when you understand what the arrangement was." She looked up at him. He was watching her with that careful expression, waiting, giving her time to get there herself. And she didn't want to get there herself because the direction the logic was moving was somewhere she did not want to go, but she'd spent 24 years being practical about things she didn't want to be practical about, and so she followed it. "They paid for her care," she said slowly. 40% of it. "Why?" "Because someone asked them to." "Who?" "Your mother did." The room did something, not literally. The walls stayed where they were, the desk stayed where it was, the chandelier above her remained fixed to the ceiling. But the room did something anyway, a kind of internal shift, like a building settling. "That's not possible," Alara said. "I have the correspondence." "My mother didn't know the Ashcrofts. She knew someone connected to them." Damien nodded to the woman at the laptop, who pulled up a different document. 8 years ago. A man named Gerald Ashcroft, Vivian's father, had a business dealing with a contractor in Pilsen. The contractor was connected to your mother's building management through a rental dispute she filed. She met Gerald Ashcroft at a mediation. They stayed in contact. My mother never mentioned she wouldn't have. She told me everything. Not this, he said. Not unkindly, just directly. Ilara stood very still. She could feel her heart doing something deliberate and mechanical in her chest, that physical response to information that the mind hasn't caught up to yet. She breathed through it. Why wouldn't she tell me, she said. Look at the correspondence. She didn't want to look at the correspondence. She looked at the correspondence. The emails were scanned, her mother's account, an old Yahoo address she'd set up in the early 2000s and never changed. The exchange with Gerald Ashcroft was formal at first, businesslike, discussing the rental dispute. Then it changed. Her mother's illness had been diagnosed in the fall of that year, and 3 months in, when the bills had already begun their accumulation, her mother had written to Gerald Ashcroft and asked for help. Not for herself. The email was dated November, 7 years ago. Ilara had been 17, working the grocery store, coming home from a late shift and finding a man bleeding in the alley. Her mother had written, "My daughter doesn't know how bad it is. She's working herself to the bone and she doesn't know. If she knew, she'd stop living her own life to take care of me. I can't let her do that. Not yet. She's 17. Please. Whatever arrangement we can reach, it stays between us." Ilara read the email twice. She read it a third time. Her mother's handwriting, not writing, typing, but she could hear her mother's voice in every phrase, the cadence of it, the particular way she constructed sentences when she was trying to sound composed about something that was destroying her, was everywhere in those paragraphs. And the thing about hearing your dead mother's voice in a room where you were already off balance was that it did not help you stay on balance. She kept it from me, Ilara said. Her voice was flat in a way that had nothing to do with lack of feeling. She was trying to protect you. I know why she did it. She set the laptop down with both hands because she needed to put it somewhere before she did something with it she couldn't take back. What does this have to do with Vivian? Gerald Ashcroft died 3 years ago. When he died, Vivian found the correspondence in his files. And Vivian is not her father. The way he said it was the way you say the key line of a story, simply, without decoration, because it didn't need any. Ilara looked at him and waited. Gerald was a pragmatic man, Damien said. Old money practical. He made an arrangement with a woman in need and he kept it quiet because that's how men like that operate. Not out of generosity exactly, but out of a certain old-fashioned sense of order. Debts paid, accounts balanced, no loose ends. He paused. Vivian found the records and saw something different. She saw her father funneling foundation money to a woman who had no formal connection to any charitable program they ran. No documentation of approval, no board sign-off. In legal terms, it looked like misappropriation. He was helping a sick woman. Yes, without institutional authorization, using foundation accounts. Damien looked at her steadily. Vivian could have buried it. She chose not to. What she chose to do instead was use it. Use it how? She's been sitting on those records for 2 years, waiting for the right moment to leverage them against anyone who might threaten her position or her family's standing. He paused again. My name is in those records, Ilara, as a reference Gerald Ashcroft cited when he made the original arrangement. He knew me. He used my name to vouch for the discretion of the transaction. She felt the room do the thing again. So you're in this, she said. I've been in it since Gerald died and Vivian decided to start using what she found. And she invited me here tonight to... She stopped, worked it through. To use me against you. If she could establish that there was an irregular financial connection involving your name and a woman connected to the underground, Shah, to your world, she was building a narrative, he said. She needed you publicly discredited first. Make you look like a thief, a liar, someone whose credibility was already destroyed. Then the financial records come out, and the story isn't about her father's private charity. It's about a criminal organization using a dying woman to launder foundation funds. The room was very quiet. Ilara sat down. Not gracefully. She sat down the way a person sits when their legs make the decision before their mind does, finding the edge of a chair and landing on it heavily. She put her hands on her knees and looked at the floor and breathed. She had spent 2 years believing she understood what her mother's illness had cost. She had receipts, or what she'd thought were receipts, the second jobs, the debt, the math she'd done 100 times about how much money had moved from her hands to the medical system. She had carried the weight of it as a specific, measurable thing. She knew its shape. She had not known its actual shape at all. She was protecting me, Ilara said again, to the floor. Yes. And it's going to be used to destroy us both. Only if we let it. She looked up. How do you propose we don't let it? I've been building a counter case for 14 months, he said, since I found out what Vivian had. Financial records, communications, board minutes. Everything that proves what Gerald Ashcroft did was an act of private charity, poorly documented but not illegal, and everything that proves Vivian has been deliberately misrepresenting it. He paused. But there's a piece I was missing. What piece? The original correspondence, Gerald's copy. Vivian has hers, but Gerald's personal files, his actual paper records, went to the estate archive when he died. I've had people looking for them for 8 months. The archive is here, in this building. Ilara stared at him. You need me to get them, she said. I need someone who can move through this house tonight without raising the kind of attention that I raise. He looked at her directly. You know how to be invisible. I've been invisible my whole life, she said, and the bitterness in it surprised her, came out sharper than she'd intended. I know, he said, and he said it like he meant it. I'm asking you to use it one more time. She should have said no. She said yes. The archive was in the East Wing, 2 floors up, in a room that had been Gerald Ashcroft's private study before his death, and had since been maintained as a kind of preserved space. Not a museum exactly, but the domestic version of one. A room kept because getting rid of it required a decision Vivian apparently hadn't made yet. Damien's woman, her name was Rains, she offered it without effect, gave Ilara the room number and a description of the filing system Gerald had used, which was old-fashioned and alphabetical, the kind of system a man of his generation would have found obvious. Ilara moved through the house the way she moved through the diner on a full Saturday, with purpose that didn't look like urgency. The party was a cover in and of itself. There were enough guests that a woman moving through a hallway looked like a woman looking for a bathroom, and she had spent enough years being dismissed that no one's eyes tracked her with any real attention. The East Wing was quieter. The sounds of the party faded as she climbed the second staircase, muffled by the walls and the distance and the particular kind of thick carpet that old money put in hallways to communicate that sound was vulgar. She found the room. The door was unlocked. Inside it was exactly as Rains had described, a dark study, shelves of files in labeled boxes, a desk with nothing on it, the preserved quality of a space no one currently used. She found the G section of the filing shelf in 4 minutes. Gerald's notation system was indeed alphabetical, and also she discovered cross-reference by year, which meant it took her another 3 minutes to isolate the box that covered the period she needed. She pulled the box from the shelf. She opened it. The files inside were dense, correspondence, receipts, contracts, the accumulated paper record of a rich man's private transactions. She worked through them with the focused efficiency of someone who has spent years organizing chaotic information under time pressure. Her hands moved fast, her eyes faster. She found the file marked Quinn in 11 minutes. She pulled it. It was thicker than she'd expected. Not just the original correspondence, there were payment records, bank transfers, a handwritten note she recognized as Gerald Ashcroft's stationery. She turned to the handwritten note because handwritten things said the most. It read, in a neat and practiced hand, Eleanor Quinn, Pilsen, good woman, bad situation. Not a charity case, a debt. DV vouched. That's enough for me. DV Damien Voss. She stood in Gerald Ashcroft's dead study holding a file about her dead mother and read those 4 words over again. DV vouched. That's enough for me. He had known. Not peripherally, not vaguely. He had known about her mother, about the arrangement, about the money. He had been the reason the arrangement happened at all. Not Gerald Ashcroft's old money pragmatism. Not coincidence. Damien Voss, who had been in an alley in Pilsen bleeding at 3 a.m. and been helped by a 17-year-old girl, had repaid that debt by calling in a favor with a man who could quietly cover 40% of that girl's mother's medical bills. For 2 years. Without telling her. The file in her hands felt different than it had 30 seconds ago. She stood there in the dark study and she thought about that. About the shape of what he'd done, which was not small and not casual, and had required a decision, a deliberate choice, made by a man who operated in a world of deliberate choices and understood their cost. He had chosen to do this quietly, anonymously, in a way that she could not know about and therefore could not refuse. She could not decide, standing there, whether that was the most generous thing anyone had ever done for her or something else entirely. The line between protection and control was a line she had some experience standing on the wrong side of. She put the file under her arm. She turned to leave. Vivian Ashcroft was standing in the doorway. She was not alone. Behind her stood a man Alara didn't recognize. Heavy-set, dark suit, not one of the regular security guards. And beside her, partially visible in the hallway, was the woman Alara had seen earlier, the sharp-shouldered blonde who'd been whispering at the party. Vivian looked at the file under Alara's arm. "I had a feeling," she said, "that he'd use you for this." Alara didn't move. "Put the file down," Vivian said, "and we can still make tonight salvageable, for you." She paused. "I know about the debt. I know what my father paid for. I know what you've been carrying." Something in her voice shifted, not softening, but reconfiguring, finding a new angle. "My father liked to feel like a good man. He liked to make quiet arrangements that cost him nothing real and gave him the feeling of virtue. But the money he used? That came from the foundation board, from donors who gave money for children's hospitals and arts programs and thought they knew where it was going." She took a step into the room. "I'm not the villain here, Alara. I'm the person who found out what was done with other people's money." "Your father helped a dying woman," Alara said. "My father misappropriated charitable funds to settle a personal debt with a man who runs half the criminal infrastructure in this city." Vivian's voice was still measured, still carrying. "And now that man is using his connection to you, the sentimental story, the girl who saved him, the sick mother, to muddy the investigation that would expose him." The man in the dark suit had moved 2 steps into the room. Alara looked at the file in her hands. She thought about Damien downstairs, waiting. She thought about her mother's email. She doesn't know how bad it is. And the specific quality of love in those words that had also been a specific quality of deception. She thought about the note in Gerald's handwriting. DV vouched. "Tell me something," Alara said. Vivian waited. "The necklace tonight. The planted evidence. The cameras you had recording me when I walked in." She met Vivian's eyes. "If your case against him is clean, if you're actually the person just trying to do the right thing with the foundation money, why did you need to destroy me first?" Vivian's composure held for 3 full seconds. Then the man in the dark suit reached for the file, and Alara stepped back. And the distance between a room where she had all the information and a room where she had none of it collapsed to the length of one arm reaching toward her in the dark. And she understood, with a cold and clarifying certainty, that whatever the truth actually was underneath all of this, both Vivian Ashcroft and Damien Voss had been moving her like a piece on a board she hadn't known she was standing on. And the file in her hands was the only leverage she had left, and someone in this room was about to take it from her. She moved first, not away from the man reaching for the file, toward him. She'd learned that in the diner years ago, the counterintuitive physics of conflict in tight spaces, moving into someone's reach collapsed the geometry they were counting on. The man in the dark suit had longer arms and more weight, and a plan that depended on her behaving the way people usually behave when someone bigger comes at them in the dark, which was to back up, create distance, give him the angle he needed. She gave him none of it. She stepped into him, tucked the file against her chest with her left arm, and drove her right elbow up into the space between them. It connected with his chin, not clean, glancing, but enough. He made a sound and his reach went wide, and she was already moving past him toward the door, toward the hallway, toward the one direction that wasn't blocked. Vivian said something sharp. Alara didn't catch the words. She was in the hallway. The thick carpet absorbed her footsteps and everyone else's. She heard the man behind her. Heavier footfalls, faster than she expected. He'd recovered quicker than she'd wanted. And she turned left instead of right, away from the main staircase, into the part of the house she didn't know. The east wing at this hour was dark and unmanned and vast. Doors on both sides of a corridor that went further than she could see. She moved fast, not running. Running was sound. Running was a woman in a borrowed dress with a file full of evidence crashing through a billionaire's private quarters. But moving with the compressed urgency of someone who understood the margin was small. Behind her, the footsteps were closing. She tried a door. Locked. Second door. Opened into a linen closet, shelves of folded things in the dark. She didn't stop. Third door on the left. A bedroom. Moonlight through tall windows, a connecting door on the far wall. She went through it, through a dressing room that smelled of cedar and old money, out through another door into a different corridor. The footsteps behind her had slowed. He'd lost her at the turn. She stopped. She pressed her back against the wall and breathed through her mouth, quiet. The file clutched to her chest and listened. Her elbow ached where it had connected. She'd done more damage to herself than to him, she suspected, which was the reality of improvised physical conflict that no one advertised. Her heart was doing something loud and structural in her chest, the kind of beat that you feel in your back teeth. Silence in the corridor. Then, from somewhere below, a sound she recognized as the party. A collective shift in noise, voices at a different register. Something happening downstairs. She looked at the file in her hands. She had maybe 4 minutes before the man in the dark suit found this corridor, or before Vivienne pulled another lever, or before whatever was happening downstairs consumed the attention she needed to move through it. She took out her phone. She photographed every page of the Quinn file, moving fast, the flash catching each page in the darkness of the corridor, 11 pages total, including the handwritten note. She photographed the front of the folder. She photographed the payment records. She sent them to the only number she had for Damien. Then she put the original file under her arm again, and she moved toward the sound of the party. Because disappearing into the house was a trap, and the only place she was harder to contain was in the middle of 400 witnesses. The main staircase opened onto the ballroom's upper gallery, a mezzanine level with a wrought iron railing that looked down over the entire floor. She came out of the East Wing corridor onto this level and stopped at the railing and looked down. The party had changed, not collapsed, not yet, but altered in the way weather alters a sky before the event. A collective tension, a shift in how people were standing and where they were looking. Near the main entrance, 3 men in dark coats had come in who were not guests. Alara could tell the difference from 30 feet above the floor. Guests had a quality of leisure to their bodies, a performed ease. These men didn't have that. They had the upright stillness of people on a job. Damien was standing near the center of the floor with Rains at his left and a man she didn't know at his right, and he was looking at his phone. Her photos. She watched him look at them, watched him look up, scan the mezzanine, find her. He said something to Rains. From the other end of the gallery, the East Wing side, she heard footsteps. She didn't look. She moved to the staircase and came down fast, her hand on the railing for the turns, the borrowed dress not built for this kind of movement, something pulling at the safety pin in the back, Carmen's dress doing its best and not quite managing. She hit the ballroom floor and moved through the edge of the crowd toward Damien, and people stepped out of her way, which they would not have done an hour ago, but apparently the calculus had changed. He met her halfway. "You got them," he said, looking at her face. "Vivienne has someone on me. Dark suit, heavy set, East Wing, second floor." "I know who he is." Rains was already moving. "You're okay?" "I'm fine." You have the original?" "Yes." She held the file. She did not give it to him. "We need to talk." His eyes went to the file and back to her face, and she could see him read the situation, read what was in her expression, do the arithmetic. He was fast at arithmetic. Now, she confirmed. They moved to the edge of the room. Around them, the party continued to destabilize slowly, the presence of the 3 men at the entrance having distributed itself through the crowd as unease, the specific kind that attaches to events of uncertain origin. Alara could hear Vivienne's voice somewhere across the room, controlled and carrying, managing someone's perception of something. "Gerald's file has a handwritten note," Alara said. She kept her voice low and level. "DV vouched. That's enough for me." Damien's expression didn't change. "You knew," she said. About my mother. You arranged it. Yes. From the beginning. From about a month after the alley. He met her eyes. I had someone check on you. Not watching. Checking. I wanted to know you were okay. I found out about your mother's diagnosis. And you called in a favor with Gerald Ashcroft. He owed me something. I used it for something that mattered. She held the file between them, like a document of everything she didn't know about her own life. You should have told me. You were 17. I was 22 when she died. You had 5 years to tell me. He didn't have an answer for that. Not an immediate one. She watched him not have it, watched his jaw work slightly, watched him make the choice to be honest about the absence rather than fill it with something inadequate. I know, he said finally. And tonight, sending me up there, you knew the file had your name in it. Yes. So you knew exactly what I was going to find. Yes. And you sent me anyway. I needed you to know the truth before... He stopped. The 3 men at the entrance had moved. They were coming into the room. Before this, he said, the man at the front of the 3 was wearing a federal badge clipped to his belt. Not performing it, just wearing it, visible, the way you wear it when you want a room to understand the nature of your presence. He moved through the crowd with the patient authority of someone who understood that rooms like this eventually came to him. Damien looked at Alara. Whatever you decide to do with that file, he said quietly, it's yours. I mean that. I'm not going to take it from you. Vivian's man tried. I'm not Vivian. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about her mother's email again. She doesn't know how bad it is. And about the handwritten note, DV vouched. And about the specific texture of being loved by people who expressed it as protection and called it the same thing. She didn't have time to finish that thought. Vivian had appeared on the mezzanine above the ballroom at the gallery railing, looking down. Beside her stood the heavy-set man, her elbow still registered his chin, and 2 others. Vivian's composure was intact, and her timing was deliberate, and the fact that she'd appeared at that specific moment above the room with the federal agent moving through the floor below meant the timing was coordinated. She called them, Alara said. Yes. This was always the plan. Tonight was the setup. Get you here, get me discredited, get the federal presence ready to receive whatever narrative she's built. She understood it now in full, the complete shape of the evening, the mechanism of it. The financial records she's been holding, she's giving them to him tonight. That's my read. And your counter case, the documentation. Where is it? With my legal team, encrypted. It can be accessed, but it takes time to... How much time? Hours we don't have. The federal agent was 40 feet away and moving. Alara looked at the file in her hands. She looked at Vivian on the mezzanine above. She looked at the room, the 400 people, the cameras that the Ashcroft staff had been running all evening for the event's social media documentation, the string quartet that had stopped playing again because a string quartet cannot sustain a performance through certain kinds of atmosphere, the faces of politicians and executives and people whose positions in the city were measured in what they controlled and who they owed. She thought about Carmen's dress with the safety pin. She thought about the morning, the ceiling, the coffee machine. She thought about her mother writing she doesn't know how bad it is and protecting her from the shape of the world. And she thought about what that protection had actually meant, which was that she had moved through the last 7 years of her life not knowing the actual dimensions of the space she was inhabiting. She was done not knowing. I need a microphone, she said. Damien looked at her. What? The event has a sound system, the podium. She'd clocked it when she came in. Stage left. The setup for the formal remarks portion of the evening that hadn't happened yet. A standing microphone, the kind used for gala speeches. Give me 2 minutes at that microphone. Alara, you said it was my choice what to do with the file. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression that she didn't try to name. Then he turned to Rains and said 3 words she couldn't hear, and Rains moved toward the sound system. The federal agent was 20 feet away, and his eyes had found Damien. Alara moved toward the podium. She had never spoken into a microphone in her life. She had never stood in front of a crowd larger than the diner on a Sunday morning. She had no training in this, no preparation, no script. She had a file full of documents and a 24-year history of being the person in the room no one thought was worth listening to. And she had a very specific and clarifying anger that had been building since she'd opened an envelope at the diner counter that morning and made the mistake of believing it was about generosity. The microphone was live. She knew it was live because she'd watched Rains touch something on the board and nod at her across the room, and because the ambient sound of the room shifted the way it shifts when a sound system activates, a sub-perceptible change in the air. She stood at the podium. She said, "My name is Alara Quinn." The room did not go quiet immediately. It went quiet in stages. The people nearest the podium first, then radiating outward, the conversations dying back the way a fire dies back when the oxygen is cut, until the silence was near complete and the only sounds were the movement of people turning and the distant traffic from Lakeshore Drive beyond the windows. Vivian, on the mezzanine, had gone absolutely still. The federal agent had stopped walking. "I was invited here tonight as a joke," Alara said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by that. And then she wasn't, because she had spent 24 years making her voice steady in situations that didn't deserve steadiness, and she was very good at it. "I work double shifts at a diner on Michigan Avenue. I drive a 2009 Civic with a cracked windshield, and I live in a one-bedroom apartment with a water stain on the ceiling that I've been meaning to fix for 6 months." She paused. "I want you to know that because I want you to understand exactly who is standing here." The room was completely quiet now. "Tonight, Vivian Ashcroft had a necklace planted in my coat so that I could be searched in front of all of you. She had cameras running to record my humiliation. She had it planned before I walked through the door." She held up the file. "She also has financial records she's been holding for 2 years, planning to use them to implicate a man she's afraid of in a fraud scheme that her own father constructed." She looked up at the mezzanine. "The problem is that her father's records, the originals in his own handwriting, tell a different story." Vivian's hand moved to the railing. "Gerald Ashcroft used foundation funds to help a sick woman in Pilsen who couldn't afford her medical care. Informally, without board approval. That's a governance failure." Alara's hands were flat on the podium. "It's also the reason my mother got to spend her last 2 years in a facility that gave her dignity instead of a ward that would have given her a number. And Vivian has been planning to stand in this room, in front of all of you, and call that a crime while she was the one planting jewelry in poor women's coats." The federal agent had not moved. The room had the quality of held breath. "I'm not a lawyer," Alara said. "I can't tell you what law was broken and by whom. I can tell you what I know, what's in this file. And I can tell you that every person in this room has a phone and a camera and a memory, and what happened here tonight is the kind of thing that tends not to stay in rooms like this." She set the file on the podium. "The documentation is here. All of it. Whoever wants to verify it can." She stepped back from the microphone. The room still hadn't moved, and then it moved all at once. The next 12 minutes were the most compressed Alara had experienced since the nights in the hospital, the kind of time that folds over itself, that packs too many events into a space that can't actually contain them, and so they exist simultaneously, overlapping, the way traumas do in memory. The federal agent reached Damien, and there was a conversation she was too far away to hear. Rains materialized at her left. The heavy-set man from the East Wing appeared at the edge of the crowd, and then stopped because someone else was between him and her, one of Damien's people, and the calculation changed. Vivian came down from the mezzanine. She came down the main staircase with the composure of someone who had not just had their entire plan dismantled in front of an audience, and Alara watched it and could not help the unwilling recognition that it took something, whatever else was true about Vivian Ashcroft, it took something to walk into a room you just lost like you were still choosing to enter it. She stopped 5 feet from Alara. "You don't understand what you've done," she said. Her voice was quiet. For the first time all evening, it sounded unmanaged. "I understand exactly what I've done," Alara said. "My father's reputation is complicated, same as everyone's." Alara looked at her. "You could have buried those records. He was dead. The arrangement was over. Instead, you held them for 2 years like ammunition. He broke the law. He helped a dying woman and called in a favor to do it. You humiliated a living one and called it justice." She held Vivian's gaze. Those aren't the same thing. Something moved through Vivian's face. Not remorse, Alara didn't think. Or not only that, but something more complicated. The expression of a person confronting the version of themselves that the room has just been shown and finding it different than the version they'd been carrying. The federal investigation doesn't stop because you made a speech, Vivian said. I know. Damien Voss is still... I know who he is, Alara said. I've known for about an hour. She left Vivian standing there. Damien was near the entrance. The federal agent was still with him, and the conversation had a quality she could read from across the room. Not an arrest, not yet. A negotiation, the particular posture of two people who each have leverage and are doing the math on it. Rain stood at the edge of it with the stillness of a person who had been in rooms like this before. Alara reached Damien's side. He looked at her. The copies I sent you, she said, quietly enough for just him. I sent them somewhere else too. His expression shifted. My email. Time-stamped. And a journalist I found in your guest list. The one from the Tribune. The woman in the blue dress near the bar. She met his eyes. So whatever deal gets made in the next 5 minutes, there's a version of this that lives outside it. He was quiet for a long moment. You don't trust me, he said. I trust that you did something real for my mother, and I trust that you did it without telling me. And I think both of those things are true at the same time. She held his gaze. I'm done being a piece that moves without knowing which board I'm on. The muscle in his jaw moved. Fair, he said. I need you to answer something. Ask. When this is over, she stopped, started again. Whatever Vivian has on you, whatever the federal investigation finds, whatever the truth is about your business and the people in it, is there a version of this where I'm clear? Where my mother's name is clear? He looked at her for a long time. The room was still moving around them, the chaos of a shifted evening finding its new shape. Guests departing, conversations happening in tight, urgent clusters, the event collapsing into something else. The federal agent was on his phone. Rains had disappeared somewhere. Yes, Damien said. How certain? Certain enough. That's not... It's the most honest answer I can give you. He held her gaze without apology. I can promise you the documentation exists to clear your mother's name completely. I can promise it will be presented. What I can't promise is how the people in that building... He tilted his head toward the federal agent. Decide to use what they have. She understood that. Hated it and understood it. And Vivian, she said. He looked across the room to where Vivian stood, still near the center, her group reformed around her, the architecture of her social position reconstructing itself even now with the automatic persistence of something that had been built over decades and didn't know how to do anything else. Vivian has problems that started before tonight and will continue after it, he said. The necklace, the cameras, 400 witnesses. He paused. Her father's records cut both ways. She was holding misappropriated foundation documents without reporting them to the board. That's not nothing. That's also not justice. No, he agreed. It's law. They're different things. She looked at the room, at the file still sitting on the podium where she'd left it, two of the Tribune journalist's colleagues now photographing its pages, the event's own camera crew having caught the whole speech on the foundation's recording equipment. The irony of that sitting somewhere in her chest like a coin that hadn't landed yet. She had walked into this building 3 hours ago as a punchline. She had no idea what she was now. Damien's phone rang. He looked at it. Something in his face changed, a sharpening, the particular focus of a man who has been waiting for a specific call and just received it. He looked at Alara. My legal team, he said. They've accessed the counter documentation, the full file. He held the phone. If I put them on with the federal agent right now, this gets resolved tonight. The Ashcroft Foundation records get contextualized. Your mother's name comes out clean. He paused. But it also means I have a conversation with him that I've been avoiding for 2 years. She understood what he was telling her. What does that conversation cost you? She said. He didn't answer immediately. Damien. It costs me several things I've been protecting, he said, that I've been protecting past the point where protecting them made sense. She looked at him. She thought about the alley in Pilsen and a man bleeding on the ground who'd chosen not to ask for anything she wasn't offering, and about an old note in a dead man's handwriting and what it meant that he'd spent 7 years repaying a kindness that she hadn't even known she'd given. "Make the call," she said. He held her gaze for one more second. Then he answered the phone and turned to the federal agent and said, "There's something you need to hear." And the last wall between the evening as it had been planned and the evening as it was actually going to end came down, and Alara stood in the center of the Ashcroft ballroom in Carmen's borrowed dress, with the safety pin finally giving way at the back, the seam opening 2 quiet inches, and she stood there and breathed and did not. She stood there and breathed and did not fall apart. That was the whole of it, in that moment. Not triumph, not relief, just the specific physical act of remaining upright while the room moved around her and the safety pin at her back gave its final quiet surrender, and Damien Voss stood 6 feet away talking into a phone that was going to cost him things she couldn't fully calculate. The federal agent's name was Carver. She learned that later. In the moment, she only knew him as the man who had stopped moving when Damien started talking, who had put his own phone away and was listening with the particular stillness of someone receiving information they had been trying to locate for a long time, and had not expected to receive this way, in a ballroom, from the person they'd come to confront. The conversation took 19 minutes. Alara knew because she watched the clock on the wall above the entrance, the ornate thing with Roman numerals that was probably an antique and had probably always been correct in this house, because things in this house were maintained with the obsessive precision of people who understood that appearances were a form of infrastructure. 19 minutes. She stood near the edge of the room and did not sit down because sitting down felt like conceding something she wasn't ready to concede, and she watched Damien talk and watched Carver listen and watched the room continue its slow dissolution around them. Guests left in clusters. Not fleeing. The Chicago wealthy did not flee. They departed, with the considered pace of people who understood that the manner of your exit communicated as much as anything else about the evening. Some of them stopped to look at the file on the podium. Some of them didn't. The Tribune journalist, her name was Sujin Park. Alara had learned this when she'd approached her before the speech. A 40-second conversation conducted in urgent whispers, had photographed every page and was now in a corner with her phone pressed to her ear. Vivian had not left. That was the thing Alara kept returning to, in the spaces between watching Damien and watching the room. Vivian had not left. She stood near the far wall with 2 women who were clearly her people. The architecture of her social position diminished but not dissolved, and she watched the room with the expression of someone who has lost a specific battle and is already calculating the war. She was 26 years old, and she had made choices tonight that would cost her for years, and she knew it, and she was still standing in the room. That required something. Alara could not call it admirable and also could not pretend it required nothing. At the 19-minute mark, Damien ended the call. He handed his phone to Rains. He said something to Carver that Alara couldn't hear. Carver nodded once, not warmly, not reluctantly, the nod of a professional acknowledging a transaction, and turned toward the entrance and spoke to the 2 men who'd come in with him. They left, all 3 of them. Alara watched them go. Damien crossed the room to her. "It's done," he said. "What's done?" "The documentation my legal team provided gives Carver what he needed to separate your mother's case from the larger investigation. Her name, Gerald's arrangement, it gets classified as a private charitable transaction with inadequate documentation, not fraud. The Foundation's board gets notified. There'll be a review." He paused. "She's clear." Alara absorbed this. "And you," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "The conversation I had with Carver, it opens a process I've been delaying. There are things in my business that are going to be examined." He said it without drama. "That's appropriate." "How bad?" "Some of it is bad." He met her eyes. "Not all of it. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I'm something I'm not. I know you're not. But I want you to know that what I did for your mother, the arrangement with Gerald, that wasn't part of any calculation. It wasn't leverage. It wasn't a marker I was planning to call in." He held her gaze with the steadiness of someone who had decided to be honest about something and was going to finish being honest about it. "I found out a 17-year-old girl who'd helped me was working herself to exhaustion while her mother was dying, and I did the one thing I could do about it without making her feel like a charity case. I know, she said. You're angry about it. Yes. You're also not, she breathed out. I'm both at the same time. I'm allowed to be both. Yes, he said. You are. They stood there for a moment in the diminishing noise of the Ashcroft ballroom, the chandeliers still blazing above them with total indifference to the nature of the evening, and the string quartet's empty chairs catching the light, and somewhere outside the window the lake continuing its complete indifference to everything. My mother knew who you were, Elara said, by the time she wrote to Gerald. She figured it out about a year in, and she still accepted it. She said, he stopped, started again. She wrote to me once, one email to an address Gerald gave her. She said she didn't agree with how I made my living, but she had decided that money didn't have a conscience and she was going to let her daughter live her life for a few more years before the weight of the world found her. He paused. She said she was sorry she couldn't give you more time. The room blurred slightly. Elara blinked it clear. She was not going to cry in the Ashcroft ballroom in a borrowed dress with a broken safety pin, and she did not cry, but it was close, and she allowed herself to acknowledge that it was close. She gave me 11 seconds every morning, Elara said. He looked at her. She used to say, when I was little, when things were hard, she used to say, give yourself 11 seconds, not 10. 11. 10 means you're counting to calm down. 11 means you're choosing to keep going. She looked at the floor for a moment. I still do it. Damien said nothing. He didn't try to answer that. She was grateful for that. She went to find Vivienne. This was her choice, not anyone else's, and she made it while Damien was talking to Rains about whatever came next in his evening, which she suspected was considerably more complicated than hers. She crossed the room and stopped 3 feet from Vivienne Ashcroft and waited. Vivienne's 2 companions read the moment and excused themselves with the practiced social grace of women who had spent their lives reading rooms. Then it was just the 2 of them, in the corner of a ballroom that was 3/4 empty, the staff beginning the careful work of dismantling the evening. You should know, Elara said, that I'm not going to spend energy hating you. Vivienne looked at her. Something in her expression was raw in a way it hadn't been all evening, not broken. Elara didn't think Vivienne broke easily, and she didn't say this as a compliment or a criticism, just as observation. But raw. That's very generous, Vivienne said, and the sarcasm in it was tired rather than sharp. It's not generous, it's practical. Elara looked at her directly. You wanted to burn something down tonight. You chose me because I looked like I had nothing to lose, and so burning me cost you nothing. She paused. What I want you to understand is that you were wrong about the nothing to lose part. Vivienne was quiet. I had my mother's name, Elara said. I had the truth about who paid for her care and why. I had the knowledge that someone thought she was worth a favor. Her voice stayed level. Those aren't things you can take. You can embarrass me in front of a room. You can plant jewelry in my coat. You can make 400 rich people laugh at the waitress in the borrowed dress. But you couldn't take those things. You didn't even know they existed. Something moved through Vivienne's face. Not remorse exactly, or not only that, something more complicated. The expression of a person confronting the limits of the map they'd been using to navigate. My father, Vivienne said, and then stopped. Your father did something imperfect that helped someone. Elara waited. That's the whole story. That's all it was. He used board funds. I know what he used. You know what I mean. Vivienne looked at the floor, at the marble, white and gray, that had been walked on all evening by people performing their positions for each other. When she looked up, her expression had settled into something quieter, stripped of the architecture she'd been maintaining all night. He never told me, she said, about any of it. The arrangement, the woman in Pilsen, I found it in a box of files after the funeral. She paused. I didn't know what I was looking at. I thought... She stopped again. I thought it was something else. I know. I handled it badly. The admission landed without drama, simply, and for a moment it made Vivienne seem her actual age, 26, which was young, which was younger than it looked from outside. Yes, Ilara said. You did. She didn't offer anything more than that. She wasn't here to comfort Vivian Ashcroft, or to make the reckoning easier, or to perform a forgiveness that hadn't been earned and wasn't due tonight. She was here because she had decided, standing at the podium with a microphone and a file full of her mother's secrets, that she was not going to let anyone else narrate this evening for her, and that included its ending. She left Vivian standing in the corner. She retrieved the file from the podium. She held it under her arm, the same way she'd held it running through the East Wing corridor, and she walked to the entrance and got her coat and went outside into the cold. The weeks that followed were not clean. Clean endings were for a different kind of story, and Ilara had known enough of her own life by now to understand that the shape of real things was always more ragged than the shape you wanted them to have. There were interviews, not interrogations but close, with attorneys working the federal review of the Ashcroft Foundation. Her mother's case was examined, documented, and formally reclassified within 30 days. A letter arrived from the Foundation's new interim board, a form letter, legally precise, acknowledging an irregularity in a historical transaction and stating that no further action was required on her part. She read it twice and put it in a drawer. The Tribune ran Soo Jin Park's piece on a Thursday. It was long and careful and used words like alleged and according to documents with the professional precision of journalism that understood it was walking a legal line. But the substance was there: the gala, the planted necklace, the speech, the federal review, the history of Gerald Ashcroft's arrangement with a woman named Eleanor Quinn, who had died 14 months prior. Her mother's name, in the Chicago Tribune, attached to the word dignity rather than the word fraud. Ilara read the piece at the counter at Rosie's on her break, with coffee she'd made herself. Rosie leaned over from the other side of the counter and read it with her, saying nothing, and when they'd both finished, Rosie straightened up and said, "Your mother would have hated being in the newspaper." "Yes," Ilara said. "She would have." "Good story, though." "Yeah." Rosie refilled her coffee without being asked and went back to the grill. The legal settlement came 3 months later. Not from the Ashcrofts directly, from the Foundation's liability insurer, routed through attorneys in language so deliberately obscured that Ilara had to read it 4 times before she understood what it was offering. It was a number that was significant without being transformative, the kind of number that could change the shape of a life without removing it from recognizable territory. Her attorney, a woman named Diane Chen, who had contacted her the week after the Tribune piece, and whose fees were covered by an arrangement Ilara had negotiated herself, without Damien's involvement, deliberately, told her to take it. She took it. She spent 2 weeks thinking about what to do with it, and then she stopped thinking about it and started doing. The restaurant was not her mother's dream exactly. Her mother had never said, "I want a restaurant." What she'd said over the years in the apartment above the dry cleaner and later in the smaller place on Paulina Street was, "I want a table where people can sit down and not worry about the bill. Not a charity, not a soup kitchen, a table." Somewhere between those two things, in the specific geography her mother had always understood better than she had. She found a space in Pilsen, which was where it had to be. A former bakery, closed for 2 years, with good bones and bad plumbing, and a kitchen that needed more work than the contractor initially quoted by a margin that did not surprise her. She hired 3 people she knew: Carmen, who turned out to have a talent for front-of-house operations that had been entirely wasted circling tables at Rosie's; a line cook named Marcus who'd grown up 3 blocks from her mother's old apartment; a woman named Delia who had worked the overnight shift at the hospital where her mother had spent her last months, and who could make people comfortable in the specific way that required no performance. She named it Eleanor's, not as a monument, not as a grief project, just because it was her mother's name and the place would have her mother's sensibility, which was, sit down, eat something, and don't apologize for being here. The opening was not an event. It was a Tuesday in March, gray and cold, the kind of day Chicago produced without effort, and she unlocked the door at 11 in the morning, and the first people through it were Devin Marsh and his girlfriend, who had heard about it from Carmen and came because Devin said he owed her at least 1 breakfast. He left a 40% tip. "You don't have to," she started. "Shut up," he said. "Let someone do something." She let him. Damien came in for the first time on a Saturday in April, without announcement, the way he'd arrived at the Ashcroft estate, not because he wanted to make an entrance, but because he had not learned, and apparently was not going to learn, to communicate his timing in advance. He sat at the counter, not a table. He ordered coffee and whatever was on the stove. What was on the stove was her mother's vegetable soup, the recipe from a card her mother had written by hand in the early 90s, and which Alara had found tucked inside the coffee machine when she'd cleaned it out. Damien ate it without comment for a while. Then he said, "How's it going?" "We're covering costs." "That's not the same as going well." "It's the same as going." She poured herself coffee and stood on the other side of the counter. "Your legal situation." "Ongoing." He said it without weight. "Several things resolved, some things unresolved." "Are you going to be okay?" He looked at her. "Define okay." "Not in federal custody." "Yes," he said. "That's—" A pause. "There were negotiations. I gave things. I kept things. The process is what the process is." She didn't push further. She'd learned over the months since the gala that there was a version of Damien's world she was adjacent to and a version she was not inside, and that distinction was one she'd made herself and intended to keep. She wasn't naive about what he was. She wasn't performing naivety. She just understood, in the way that a practical person understands the weather, that the full accounting of who Damien Voss was and what he'd done over 20 years of operating in the Chicago underworld was not something that resolved cleanly. And she had made a choice about which parts of that she was willing to hold and which parts she was not. What she was willing to hold was this: a man had bled in an alley and she'd helped him, and he'd remembered that for 7 years and spent it quietly, without asking for recognition or leverage. And then one night he'd walked into a room where she was being humiliated, and he'd stopped it. That was not nothing. That didn't require her to excuse everything else, and she didn't ask him to explain everything else, and he didn't. She would have liked this place, he said. Alara looked around the restaurant, the tables she'd refinished herself over 3 weekends, the mismatched chairs she'd sourced from an estate sale in Bridgeport, the smell of the soup and the gray March light coming through the front windows. She would have complained about the chairs, Alara said. What's wrong with the chairs? Nothing. She just would have wanted to pick them herself. He looked at the chair he was sitting on, then back at her. Something moved through his expression that was easier to read now than it had been in November. She'd had months of practice, and she'd learned that his face didn't offer much, but what it offered was usually accurate. She picked them, he said, indirectly. I know, Alara said. That's what I meant. The counter between them was worn wood, the same wood the bakery had used, which she'd kept because stripping out the original material felt like a kind of dishonesty she wasn't interested in. It had rings from coffee cups going back years, scratches from equipment she'd never know the name of. She looked at it for a moment. Damien. Yeah. The night at the gala. When you walked in and saw me, she paused. You knew who I was before you saw me. Someone had told you I'd be there. Yes. Who? He set his coffee down. Raines had been monitoring the invitation list. Your name appeared 2 weeks before the event. I thought it was a coincidence. Then I thought it wasn't. So you came to... I came to see if you were okay. He said it simply. That's the whole of it. I came to see if you were okay and if Vivian was using you to get to me, and it turned out both things were true at the same time. She thought about that, about the timing of it, him appearing at those doors at that specific moment, the music stopping, the room parting. It had looked like theater. It had felt like theater, standing in the center of the ballroom being searched and mocked. And it had been real, which was the thing about life that consistently confounded the expectation that real things couldn't also look constructed. Thank you, she said. He looked at her. For coming, she said, and for the arrangement with Gerald, and for not making me know about it while I was 17 and barely holding things together. He was quiet for a moment. Your mother told me not to tell you, he said, in her email. She was very clear about it. I know. I'm still thanking you for respecting that. He drank his coffee. She refilled it. Outside, Pilsen was doing its Saturday morning thing, the street traffic, the smell of the tamale cart 2 blocks down that operated regardless of weather, the sound of kids somewhere she couldn't see. The light through the windows of Eleanor's was the flat gray of April in Chicago, which was a different quality of gray than November. Less hostile, more provisional, the kind of gray that suggests it might become something else before the day is through. He came back the following Saturday, and the one after that. He did not make declarations. He did not arrive with flowers or speeches or the kind of performed romanticism that Ilara had always found exhausting in the abstract and would have found intolerable in practice. He arrived on Saturday mornings and sat at the counter and drank coffee, and sometimes they talked and sometimes they didn't, and the silence between them was the kind of silence that two people build incrementally over time until it becomes a place they both inhabit without effort. Carmen noticed first. "The man who comes in on Saturdays," she said one morning in the kitchen before opening, in the tone of someone who has been waiting to say something for several weeks and has decided today is the day. "What about him?" "Nothing," Carmen said. "Just nothing. He looks at you like you're the only stable thing in the room." Ilara considered this. "He was never known for stability," she said. "No," Carmen agreed. "I know. And I'm not interested in being someone's anchor." "I know that too." Carmen started prepping the mise en place with the efficiency of someone who understood that they were going to finish saying the thing regardless of where the conversation went. "I'm just saying, he doesn't look at you like you owe him anything. Some men look at you like you owe them for how they're looking at you." She shrugged. "He just looks?" Ilara didn't answer. She thought about it for the rest of that day. She thought about it while she ran the lunch service and after, when the restaurant was empty and she was reconciling the till and the light outside had finally made its April decision and come through the front windows golden and unambiguous. She was 24 years old. She had a restaurant in Pilsen that was covering its costs and some days exceeding them. She had her mother's recipe on a handwritten card pinned above the kitchen pass-through, not as decor, but as instruction. She had Carmen and Marcus and Delia and Devin, who came in on Sundays now too, and brought his girlfriend, who turned out to be a graphic designer who had made Eleanor's a logo for free because she said the story deserved a good mark. She had the cracked mirror from the apartment, which she'd replaced finally, partly with settlement money, and partly because she'd looked at it one morning and understood that keeping it was a different thing than honoring where she'd come from. She had 11 seconds every morning, same as always. The Saturday in May that she remembered afterward was not different from the others in any obvious way. Same gray counter, same coffee, same Damien on his usual stool with his hands around the cup in the particular way he held things. Not gripping, just present. The soup was different because Marcus had suggested adding a pinch of something that had made it slightly better, and she'd let him because the point of having people around you was to let them be right sometimes. She had been going to say something unremarkable about the week. She found herself saying something else. "I've been thinking," she said. He looked at her. "About what you said at the gala. When you told me walking back into that room would make me involved." She set down the cloth she'd been using to wipe the counter. "I've been thinking that I was already involved. I was involved the minute my mother wrote that email, the minute she decided to protect me. I've been involved in a story that other people were narrating since I was 17 years old." He waited. "I'm tired of finding out things after the fact," she said. "About my own life." "I understand that," he said. "I want you to tell me things," she said. "Not everything. I know what your world is, and I'm not asking you to hand me the map of it. But if something affects me or might affect me, I want to know before it does." "Yes," he said. "That's it?" "Yes," he said again. "That's a reasonable thing to ask. I'll do it." She looked at him. He looked back with that stillness she'd been watching for months now. The stillness that was not indifference, but its opposite. A man who had learned to be very quiet about what he felt, because the world he'd lived in punished expressiveness, and who was, slowly, in the space of a counter, and 2 cups of coffee, and Saturday mornings in Pilsen, unlearning that. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She picked up the cloth again. She put it down. She came around the counter and stood in front of him and looked at him with the same directness she'd used in the ballroom, in the corridor, in the study, in every moment of that night when she'd needed to see something clearly and had made herself do it. "I need you to know something," she said. "Tell me." "What you did for my mother. I've decided it's the most significant thing anyone has ever done for me. Not the money. The decision. The decision not to let her carry it alone." She paused. I'm not forgiving you for not telling me. I don't think forgiveness is the right word. I know what it was. I understand what it was. And I'm not going to spend energy pretending I don't. He held her gaze without flinching. She asked me once, he said quietly, what I thought she should tell you. When you were 20, I said I thought you could handle it. He paused. She said you could handle anything. That wasn't the question. She said the question was whether you should have to. Alara stood very still. She was protecting me again, she said. She was, he said. She never stopped. The restaurant was quiet around them. The last of the lunch light was long through the windows, the golden kind that made everything in a room look like it was worth keeping. Outside, Pilsen moved through its Saturday afternoon with the same indifference and warmth it moved through everything. The kids, the tamale cart, the sound of a radio from an upstairs window playing something in Spanish that she couldn't quite make out. She had not built this life in order to stand in it and feel the specific weight of all the things that had brought her here. She had built it because her mother had set a table where people can sit down and not worry about the bill, and because Carmen had agreed to come, and because the bones of the old bakery were good, even if the plumbing wasn't, and because some things deserved to be made from what remained after the hard part. But she was standing in it now, and she felt it anyway. She said, "Stay for dinner." Damien looked at her. At the restaurant around them, at the menu on the board above the pass-through, the one Delia had written out by hand because Alara had decided they were not a printed menu kind of place. "Yes," he said. She went back around the counter. She told Marcus there would be one more for dinner. She put water on. Outside, the light did what April light eventually does in Chicago when it decides to commit. Came through fully, without reservation. And the restaurant on the corner of the street in Pilsen that had once been a bakery and was now a place where people sat down without worrying about the bill was lit up warm from the inside, the way a room looks when it's being used for what it was meant for. And Alara Quinn stood in the kitchen of the things she'd made from what she'd had, and she gave herself 11 seconds, and then she kept going. This is a work of fiction created solely for artistic and entertainment purposes. All characters, events, organizations, and locations are entirely fictional and bear no resemblance to any real individuals or entities.